keep him in your prayers. Of course, Terry and Janice continually, a lot of other folks. Holly is first on the list for Tuesday morning up near Birmingham for her back surgery. So I asked Andrea this morning if she was going to be able to get up at 3 o'clock so we could be there at the crack of dawn, and she just sort of looked at me and blinked. So anyone else that we need to think about in the sick list? Okay. Brother Terry, would you lead us in a prayer before we begin our class, please? Amen. I would like to ask you to do one other thing in your daily prayers, if you would. Just keep this country in your prayers. We've had a horrible past week. The shooting down in Pensacola. Those serving and protecting America. We've had in the past, I think it's past 4 days, we've had 3 cops killed in the line of duty. One in Huntsville, one in Houston, and went brain dead on the other one, Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas, last night. So keep those in your thoughts and prayers too. Deuteronomy. We're going to pick up with chapter 10. Brother Jeremy Day had gotten us through chapter 9, but I need to back up into chapter 9 to tie in a couple of things, or at least one thing. And in chapter 10, I'm looking at verse 10, but in chapter 9, verse 10, it said, "The Lord delivered unto me 2 tablets of stone, written with the finger of God, and on them was written according to all the words which the Lord spake unto you in the mount out of the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly." Now, this is the first set of tablets, or the first pair of stone documents. Because if you look over then at verse 17, it says, "I took the 2 tablets and cast them out of my 2 hands and brake them before your eyes." So, set number 1, written by the finger of God. Moses saw what was going on when he came down off the mountain, threw them down and broke them. Now, when we pick up in chapter 10, starting at verse 1, it says, "At that time the Lord said unto me, Hew thee 2 tablets of stone like unto the first, and come up unto me into the mount, and make thee an ark of wood." Here he's combining some thoughts. All of this is not happening on the same day. He's combining thoughts, because if you go back into the book of Exodus, you see where the Ark of the Covenant was constructed and things of that, and that's what that's referring to. And then in verse 2, he says, "And I will write on the tablets the words that were in the first tablets which thou breakest, and thou shalt put them into the ark." So, this is the second set of tablets. Now, who wrote the second set of tablets? Because it says so, right? Well, what are we going to do when we get back over to Exodus chapter 34? Exodus 34. I'll get to the right page in a minute. And verse 27. And the Lord said unto Moses, Write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words I have made a covenant with thee and with Israel. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water, and he wrote upon the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. The Lord said unto Moses, Write these words. Okay. Still the words of God, no matter who wrote them. Okay. I had teased Brother Clonch out before class, telling him I was going to ask him to help us on this one because he has studied Hebrew. I have not. I have to rely on others. But from the people that I have read, the authorities, they all agree that what this verse is actually talking about, and Brother Clonch can jump in and help me out or throw bricks at me, one or the other. But what they're talking about is when the Lord said unto Moses, Write thou these words, what they are talking about is what is being said between verse 10 and verse 26, that he's writing those words. But the Lord, because we're in chapter 34, and if we go back to the first verse in chapter 34, the Lord said unto Moses, Hew thee 2 tablets of stone unto the first, and I will write upon these tablets the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. So, for those that try to pick nits and make the Bible contradict itself, in 2 places, Exodus 31 and 34 and 1, and in Deuteronomy 10, the Lord said that he was going to do the writing. And it's that one place in chapter 34 that said that he told Moses to write. So that would be something different than the 10 Commandments that was on the first table of stone. So God did write on both tablets. Why did Moses have to hew out the second set? Because if you go back to the first set again, God just gave him the first set of tablets. Moses didn't have anything to do with it. So why did Moses have to at least hew out the second set of tablets? He was going to have to be vested in it some way because he destroyed the first set. So he hewed them out, and then God wrote on them. Have I confused everybody? Question, Brother Terry, can you help me clarify? Or which is what Jeff said. That God was the author regardless of who physically did it. So I brought all that up just to make you think. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Well, that's those that I said, verses 10 through 26, because the Jewish scholars that I read on the subject, and they use fancy words about and I can't even remember the words that they used, but it had to do with the way verbs and nouns and pronouns are ascribed to different statements. What the ones I read said in that last phrase where it says, and he wrote upon the tablets, the he is reverting back to Jehovah, God. And the prior to that, Moses was instructed then to write the additional rules, not the Ten Commandments themselves. So I wanted to bring that out just so y'all could have something to think about over the next week or two and go do a little bit of studying on it. So now that I've got you confused, questions or comments? And it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things if God did it physically, literally, or Moses followed his instructions. Moses came down off the mountain with the tablets that was to go into the ark. Yes, ma'am. And the significant words to me in the whole thing is on the second set, the words like the first. So whatever God had fingered on the first set was going to be on the second set. So anything else? Okay, verse 4, and he wrote on the tablets according to the first writing the Ten Commandments which the Lord spake unto you in the mount in the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. Okay. The next thing we need to look at, we can go down to verse 10 of chapter 10. Stayed in the mount according to the first time 40 days and 40 nights. And then in verse 12, and now Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee but to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve him, the Lord thy God, with all thy heart, with all thy soul. We've heard this phrase before with words added to it. I love the one in Mark, heart, soul, mind, body. It is to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Now, another thing that some folks don't really think about is the miracle that took place the 40 days that he was on the mountain. Because if you go back, you'll find out that he didn't eat or drink anything for 40 days. For those of you that know anything about the body or first aid or anything like that, how long can a person go today without water? Anything over 3 days, you start really, really pushing it. And again, it depends on climate and temperatures and things like that. But exertion, you can go without food a lot longer. He could have probably made it 40 days without food. But I don't watch them, but I have accidentally paused on them long enough to see that on these reality TV shows, that the people that go out there and they're only out there for 3 weeks, 21 days, and even though they've got, Bobby's really going to appreciate what I'm about to say now. Anyone that volunteers to go out and live on the land for 21 days should have the ability to find food and take care of themselves. But every one of them will lose 20, 30 pounds. So, but God took care of Moses, because Moses, after 40 days on the mountain, Moses had the strength to walk down that mountain with those tablets. And so a little miracle was taking place there. In verse 16, it says, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked people. If you recall, all the way through the Exodus, and several times the people were referred to as stiff-necked. What does that mean? Stubborn. Putting it in one word, they're stubborn. Hard-headed, if you want to go that route. And because everything that come up, they was always confrontational about it. So don't be stiff-necked anymore. So what does it mean then to circumcise the foreskin of your heart? Because your heart does not have a foreskin in the medical, legal sense of the word. Hard-hearted. So what the emphasis there is, why did they circumcise in the first place? I'm sorry? It was part of the covenant to show that they were going to adhere to, or supposed to anyway, to adhere to the Jewish set of laws. God here puts it now on a spiritual plane. What are we in the New Testament to do? We're not to follow the Old Testament law. There's no law that we need to modify our bodies in any way. Where does everything take place with us today in Christianity? Are supposed to, in our heart. So here that's where he switches that around to. Questions or comments on chapter 10? Chapter 11, therefore thou shalt love the Lord thy God and keep his charge and his statutes and his judgments and his commandments. How many times have we read this just in the past couple of weeks? Keep reminding, keep reminding, keep reminding. Why do we offer the Lord's invitation after every service? And why should we? Pardon? To keep it there so people know it's available, reminding people of the importance of it. Always the opportunity. And then verse 2, and know ye this day. I speak not with your children which have not known and which have not seen his miracles, his acts, what he did in the army of Egypt, what he did unto you in the, I'm skipping some verses here. Let me go back and do it this way. Verse 2, and know ye this day, verse 3, his miracles and his acts, verse 4, what he did to the army in Egypt, verse 5, what he did in the wilderness unto you, unto this place, verse 6, what he did unto Dathan and Abiram, verse 7, your eyes have seen all the great acts of the Lord which he did. Question, did they? The people that he is currently talking to. Pardon? No? Right. Some of them would have been old enough that they would have known what was going on, and others that were born in the wilderness as on the trip would not. But Moses is speaking to them, the current generation, what took place in the generation that was destroyed in the wilderness. So some of them did and some of them didn't. But again, it was up to the parents to tell the child, bring them up to speed on everything that was going on. And then again, he concludes that in verse 8 with, therefore shall ye keep all the commandments which I command you this day, that you be strong and go in and possess the land, whether you go to possess it. Have you noticed that through here, there's always the qualifier? I'm giving you this. And what's a qualifier mean? Condition. I'm giving you this land, the land that you're going to go in and possess. But what's the qualifier? Keep the commandments which I command you this day, that ye may be strong. So God has the plan. God is laying it out there for them. All they have to do is reach out and be obedient. And as we go through the rest of the Old Testament, how many times, don't give me an exact number, just a bunch, but how many times did they falter and not adhere to God's word? Every other chapter. And what happened to them? Punished, go into captivity when they come to their senses, sometimes in a few years, sometimes in many years. And they pleaded their case and said, we're coming back to you. What would happen? Forgiveness and all good again. Pardon? Yep. Do we have some of the same issues today? Uh, wouldn't it be nice if God had put in his plan that we could pay indulgences for a future indiscretion? Hmm? We'd all be broke. So I guess we can conclude this chapter by saying, isn't it great that God is such a merciful, forgiving God? Verse 19. Yep. Yeah. Brother Clarence. Indulgences was something that was brought up during the Crusades where they could pay the priest, and it was a money collecting scheme where they could pay the priest money now and have their conscience cleared of a sin later down the road. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on this, but how many of you today, not necessarily just today, but how many of us have done something that we shouldn't, we know was not right, that was not right, even if it was only between us and God, and we prayed for forgiveness and give me the strength to do better, and then find yourself doing the same thing tomorrow. Or as in my case, when I was driving a truck 5 miles down the road. There you go. I'm halfway joshing and halfway serious when I mentioned the fact when I was driving a truck. But any of you that have ever driven long distances, or me doing it as a profession, when somebody does something that uh, almost wrecks you or causes you to do something different, the first thought that comes to your mind, or mine anyway, was idiot or something of that nature. Well, I shouldn't be thinking that way. But then 5 miles down the road, it's something that happens that's even worse. Yesterday I was it yesterday, or well, one day Andrea and I was out, and it was when? Friday we was out. Me, when I'm driving, I'm like a terrapin turtle. My head's always moving. I know everything around me all the time. And I just happened to, and there was this car that was, I had just about ready to swerve, and then all of a sudden the wheel went, he cut back. He probably missed me by less than a foot. And when he goes by, he's looking down this way. And I point it to Andrew, and he's doing this as he's going down the road. And well, I won't say any more. Huh? You've never. Okay. But verse 19, ye shall teach them your children, speaking of them when thou sittest in the house, and when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up, and thou shalt write them upon the doorpost of thine house and upon thy gates. We discussed that part a few chapters back. But in essence, what chapter 19 is saying is what? Isn't it saying every opportunity you have to teach, teach? Whether it's sitting out fishing, walking through the woods hunting, driving, what? That's it. Immerse yourself in it and repetition. And look how many times it's repetition has been there about keeping the commandments and all. And then verse 22 to me is the one that everybody needs to mark and double mark and highlight. If ye shall diligently keep the commandments which I command you, to do them, to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to cleave unto him. What does the word diligently mean? Pardon? Carefully? Wholeheartedly? I was just about to give you an option, and you already said it. She said, with effort. I was going to ask, if you're doing something diligently, are you active or passive? You are active. Thank you. So you have to be active in keeping those commandments to do them, to love the Lord. And we've discussed this word several times, to walk in his ways. What does the word walk in his ways used in Scripture mean? Live, the way you conduct your life. So we're to actively conduct our life in such a way that we will keep those commandments. Now, the word cleave, when we get to it, it is a word that is a contronym. Do you know what the word contronym means? It contradicts itself. It can be used on both ends of the scale. Cleave, if you're in a butcher shop, means to what? Separate. Cleave in this place and other ways is to what? Bind, cling, bound, hold fast. So that one verse right there tells you to actively do it, wholeheartedly. Somebody used that phrase. Bound to it, holding fast to it, living your life that way. Questions, comments? Verse 26. Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. You ever thought about that verse? Why would God put forth in front of you a blessing and a curse? You've got your part to do too. But look how it's described in the next couple of verses. It is a blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord, which I command you. And it is a curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord, but turn aside out of the way. So, Christianity for us today, the way the plan of salvation is put into place, we could look at the plan of salvation as a blessing and a curse. Who is it a blessing to? Those that obey and follow, because what is going to be their reward? You're rewarded for being good. What's that reward going to be? Home in heaven with God, the angels, Christ. Where's the curse involved? If you don't do this, then you're going to go to the other place, guaranteed. So that's what's meant by the blessing and the curse there. Then in verse 29, it talks about the blessings be upon one mountain and the curse upon another mountain. Are they not on the other side of Jordan by the way where the sun goeth down in the land of the Canaanites? All right. Remember where they are right now. Moses is doing the talking, so where are they located in relationship to the Jordan River? On the east side or the west side? They're on the east side because Moses is not going to get to go over into the promised land. So he's saying on that other side, this is everything that's taking place. And then verse 32 concludes it by saying, ye shall observe to do all the statutes, judgments, which I set before you this day. Questions, comments on chapter 11? Chapter 12 starts out, these are the statutes and judgments which you shall do. I've highlighted these every time I run across them, so I just want to remind myself how many times Moses is telling and reminding the children what they're supposed to do. And here's what they're supposed to do, which ye shall observe to do in the land. Verse 2, utterly destroy all the places. Verse 3, overthrow their altars. So, why is it important that they totally destroy everything there, including the altars? And why, if we look back, were they told not even to have the silver or gold that was melted down from the idols? Remove all temptation. Absolutely. Verse 12, or chapter 12, then picks up with going through all the rules that they have for eating and things of that nature. And verse 32 concludes that chapter by saying, what things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. And we've gone extensively into discussing not adding to it and not taking away from it. But I want to ask you a question. How many of you have been at a congregation of the Lord's church where you have seen something added or something taken away? Nobody? One has, one, at least one is brave enough to raise the hand, or two I saw. How many of you then have been at places where you know, every time you visit a congregation and look around, people that come here and visit us and see us in action, you get a feel for what that congregation is all about, whether you see anything that's not right or not. You can get a feel of what they're doing. And also, you look around and if you go on the website, on the computer right now, and check out congregations of the Lord's church and just go to their homepage and look at the list of what they call their ministries and look at the list of who does what and look at some of the programs they have. And then if you have followed those congregations for any length of time, 5, 6, 7 years, you see the name. They're not a congregation of the Lord's church anymore. They are this or that, or they drop the name Church of Christ off of their page altogether. Some of them will say a church. Is there any such thing as a Church of Christ? There's only one church, the church. I sort of look at it this way, going back to my military days. The Armed Forces of the United States is an organization. The one and only mission of that organization is to do what, Bobby? And bear true faith and allegiance to same. That's it. Now, I was a member of the Air Force. Terry was a member of the Army. We're that unit, but what does that unit do? What the whole unit does. We have a different job to do, but it's all in the same sphere. Now, even in the Air Force, when I was assigned to Maxwell Air Force Base, I was a member of the 908. But what did the 908 do? Was it its own unit with no control by anybody? No. It all fed right up the line. So even though I am a sub down here, I am still of this total. And as down here, I can't do anything that's going to bring dishonor or discredit to the whole. So since there is one church, the Lord's church, each congregation operates in its own sphere. However, it does nothing that is going to take away from the church. And we get to some, and I'll use, I won't call it by name, but I'll use a church that's local. And by local, I mean, and I'm going to put a distance on it of less than 20 miles. Most of you will be able to figure it out. But this time of year, if you go on their web page, I don't know if they've already had it or not. I hadn't checked it this year. Last year, though, they're going to have a cantata, a Christmas cantata. Their young folks are going to dance. And they're going to put on a program with musical instruments. They used to call themselves the Church of Christ. Some of you shaking your heads and got an idea of where I'm talking about, but in the eyes of God, not in the eyes of Larry Sadler, but in the eyes of God, is that going to bring discredit to the Lord's church? Is he going to count them doing what they're supposed to? I see Luke getting up, so it's about time I get off my soapbox. But that's why, Brother Terry, I don't recall any sermons where he has not raised the Bible and said, do you have your Bible? You ready to study? Because who is responsible for Larry Sadler's salvation? Is it Terry? It's me. Terry's hired to spread the word, preach the word. Does a fantastic job. But how many of you turn your pages and follow along just to make sure? I've also made the same comments when I stand in the pulpit that don't take my word for it. I've been known to misspeak. I can, hopefully not on something that is significant, but Jeremy and I the other day was talking. I cannot tell you how many times teaching a class I have used Joshua instead of Joseph and Joe. So especially on the really important matters, we all need to be checking on each other and making sure that, because our goal as a unit, as a congregation, our goal should be that all of us do what we're supposed to, and all of us uh, get to heaven. Questions, comments? I know I'm sort of blabbing today, but Brother Gold, that's fact. Yeah, uh, not the Church of Christ, but others that do have their conventions and their meetings, and every year they will decide. Uh, they might have a meeting and vote this year that now they will accept women to preach. Uh, do they have the right to take that vote to start with? Not by the Bible. Well, not only that, but if we were to call a meeting here today, which we're going to have a teachers meeting, which is not what I'm talking about, but if we were to call a meeting today and us ask you what would be the best time for us to meet on Sunday afternoons, 5 or 6 o'clock, everybody can put in their thoughts. We can decide to do anything that we want to do. Now, the second part of that meeting is we sit there and we say, well, our attendance is kind of slack, so we're only going to have the communion once a quarter. How many is in favor of having communion once a quarter? We can do it, but it ain't right. It's not by the Bible. So and there's a place in the Bible, and Terry can probably tell me right off the top of his head, but an elder that's chosen to lead a congregation has a boss. An elder has no authority outside of Christ's directions. If it's optional matters, we deal with optional. But if the Bible says it, if it's a commandment, if it's laid down in law, elders don't have a right to change it. Congregations don't have rights to change it. And I think that is the basic point that he has made all through here. Diligently keep the commandments. Observe, do, live, keep the commandments. Questions, comments? Yes, sir. That is an excellent point, and Brother Quanch has covered that in the sermon.